And welcome back to 101 East. We're discussing today the controversy in Malaysia over whether Muslims should be allowed to convert to other religions. In the studio with us is Farish Noor, an academic and cultural commentator. Lim Heng Seng is a local lawyer, and Dr. Syed Al Tawfiq Al Atas is the Director General of the Institute of Islamic Understanding. Dr. Lim, let me come to you. The Malaysian courts are, under the Constitution, are a secular institution. The legal system is supposedly secular, yet we have a religious court that works alongside it. How practicable is that arrangement?
Well, maybe I could just go a bit into what is our legal structure, our legal system, really, the legal order that is envisaged in the Malaysian Constitution. For a start, Malaysia is envisaged to be a secular state. It is very clearly mentioned in the constitution documents. If you look at the constitution documents, it is very clearly stated that the provision that Islam is the religion of the Federation does not derogate from any other provisions of the Constitution, including Article 11, which is freedom of religion.
What we have is a system whereby the religious court takes on some duties that perhaps a legal system should be handling in the first place. I mean, from a cultural context, from a cultural standpoint, how much of a problem has that proven for Malaysia?
It's both a problem and not a problem, because we have to look at it from 2 points of view. I mean, again, the political dimension is important here. The unique thing about Malaysia is that it's one of the few countries in the world I know of where racial identity is conflated immediately with religious identity, in the case of the Malay Muslims. And I'm not the only person who said this. There have been many others who've studied this phenomenon. And if you look at the development of the parallel religious legal system in the country, some have suggested that basically what's pushing this process is an attempt to actually keep the Malay Muslim community more or less intact as a political bloc vote. And for that reason, if we were to compare the scope of personal liberties for Muslims and non-Muslims in this country, some have compared it to religious markets. In the case of the Malay Muslim community, of course, the parallel Islamic legal system in this country governs many areas of your life.
I mean, in short, you're saying that it's a very complicated system and it is causing something of a problem.
Well, actually, it's causing a problem precisely at the interfaces where Malays and non-Malays, Muslims and non-Muslims interact. And most of the cases we've seen over the past few years, for example, have involved interracial, interreligious marriages.
So from the religious perspective then, how does this work for you? Is Malaysia a Muslim country that must make sure that all its citizens adhere to religious law, or is it a secular state?
No. I mean, the whole point of putting Islam as the religion of the Federation is precisely because it seeks justice. And justice not just for the Muslims, but for all. And therefore, there is no conflagration as far as I'm concerned, because the Islamic law here, the Sharia law here, is supposed to deal, or is supposed to be meant for the Muslims. But in itself, it is limited because it only deals with family law. And therefore, criminal law is not included as part of that system. And this is another thing I want to know, why? Why is criminal law not being enacted for the Sharia courts?
You're suggesting that the religious court should be able to make judgments in criminal cases?
For the Muslims.
For the Muslims?
Yes.
Is that a feasible scenario? Is there enough of a structure within the Sharia court that would make judgment a regular and reliable process?
Well, in the first place, it was never envisaged that we will have a dual system. One country, two sets of laws, generally. What was envisaged was that for family law, for Muslims, they'll be governed by Islamic law. And there were certain other provisions for provisions of offences against the precepts of Islam.
Again, I've got to come back to my original question.
General criminal law.
But my original question is this a practicable system? Because even though you say that it was designed only for family law, we've seen it spilling out into so many areas where it's causing conflict.
Well, I don't know if perhaps Mr. Lim here is aware of this. There was a case in 1927 decided by a British judge in the case of 2 Muslim women who were seeking the communal wealth of the late husband. And the British judge in that case, this is in 1927, before there was even a Sharia system. That judge in that case, he made reference to Islamic law in deciding the case. He did not use the civil law system. And therefore, it's a little bit naive to think that it was never envisaged. I mean, it was being practiced as early as 1927 with this case that I was...
Well, with respect, what I meant was at at the stage when the Malaysian constitution wasn't formulated, that was never envisaged. The constitution documents show very clearly it wasn't intended to be a situation when we have Islamic law which is dominant over civil law.
Let's move on for a second to more of the sociological perspective on this. I mean, you have written extensively about the Malaysian situation and the interface here between the religious, cultural and political systems. I mean, ultimately, is this going to be a long-running and destructive conclusion to this debate?
Let's get back to the original question here. Your original question of whether this parallel legal system can be expanded. The answer is yes, it can be expanded. But then following from that, it also opens up the possibility of other religious communities making similar demands, i.e., if Muslims have the right to demand that they be governed according to Islamic law, then what about the other faith communities in Malaysia? Now, of course, my concern, looking at Malaysia as a multiracial, multi-religious community, is that a lot of these demands that are being made now are being made in the name of religion. But of course, they have a political manifestation. And some would argue that there's even a political agenda behind it. Now, it's an open question as to where Malaysia is heading in the long run. With the rise of communitarian religious-based politics, particularly among Malays, but also in the other non-Muslim, non-Malay communities in this country, obviously the idea of Malaysia itself, the very concept of Malaysian citizenship as a universal idea that unites all of us, erodes.
But are the elements you're talking of unique to Malaysia? I mean, would we be having this conversation in Indonesia or any other Muslim majority country?
Well, I think if we were to look at Indonesia today, lately we've seen similar trends in Indonesia, demands for, specific application of religious law for certain communities. But I suppose Malaysia, in a sense, is well ahead when it comes to the furthering of the agenda of certain communitarian groups. But conversely, if you were to look at other developing Asian societies that are multiracial and multireligious, there is still a strong civic space, a secular civic space. Countries like India, for example, where civil marriages are still allowed between Muslims and Hindus. And I suppose there is where Malaysia comes out in bold relief.
Let's get back to the starting point of this. And Lena Joy, who rightly or wrongly is serving as a bit of a focal point for the conversation in this country at least, should Lena Joy be allowed to put on her card whatever she chooses or not?
I think that goes back to the very basic fundamental right of religion, which means that a person has the right to choose the religion of her own persuasion, and by virtue of the right to profess that religion,
so I'll
have that name.
I'll call that a yes then. Same
Yes.
Same question to you.
Yes, I would say that she has every right to put whatever she wants on her as far as her religious status is concerned. But in saying so, you must not deprive the Muslim community of their responsibility. And in this case, I think in the beginning we showed about the emotional demonstrations with regard to the Muslims. Some of them calling for death. I mean, these are all emotions, and I think they are a little bit misguided. In my opinion, this all is because of the Muslims' sense of responsibility. When you have somebody in your flock that wants to leave, obviously you want to know why. When the person wants to break a contract, you obviously want to know what's the reason.
All right.
And therefore, for that reason, we have a responsibility as Muslims to find out and fulfill that responsibility first. Barring which, if you still refuse that you want to leave, then it's up to you.
Final
Therefore,
point
I think
then
she can.
to Farish, over to you for the final comment. I mean, one of the interesting elements of this is this conversation is so very rarely held in Malaysia. In fact, the Prime Minister has suggested that it not be held at all. From your perspective, a non-religious perspective, I mean, where are we going with this?
Well, first of all, I'd just like to add to what's been said earlier, and as far as I'm concerned, Lena Joy is a Christian. She's also a Malaysian, and I think these two factors need to be borne in mind. Putting aside the legal hassles and the harassment that she's faced, she is de facto a Christian by now, because that's what she confesses. She's also a Malaysian, and I think it's a tragedy that a Malaysian now has to live abroad for fear of her life. Thanks to what she's been put through over the past 2 years. So as to the question of where is Malaysia heading at the moment, of course, Malaysia has always been a challenge. It's an abstract concept. It was put together, and necessarily it's an artificial construct. But the only thing that can actually keep this idea of Malaysia, this multiracial, multi-religious, multi-ethnic Malaysia together is a common understanding that we are all Malaysians at the same time. My fear with the rise of race-based and now religion-based sectarian communitarian politics is that the very idea of Malaysia itself is eroding. And I think that's a tragedy. That's the tragedy we're looking at now, 50 years after Malaysia came into being.
And with that thought, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you all very much indeed for talking to us today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much.
My thanks to my panel, Farish Noor, Syed Ali Taufiq Al Atas and Lim Heng Seng. And from all of us here at 101 East, it's goodbye until next week.